It started on a quiet Sunday evening in late October. The kind of night when the air feels heavy with rain and memory. My daughter, Emily, had invited me over for dinner, said she missed Dad's old stories. I hadn't been to their house in months. Ever since she married Nathan, things had changed. I drove over with a bottle of wine and a pie, trying to pretend everything was normal. But I could feel that familiar knot in my stomach, the one you get when you're about to walk into a house that doesn't want you there. Nathan opened the door. No, hey, Dad. Just a nod, a half-smile that never reached his eyes. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his forearms covered in faint tattoos, new ones. He'd always looked like the kind of man who needed to prove he was tougher than he really was. Inside, the smell of roast beef filled the air, mixed with something sour, whiskey, probably. The TV was on in the background, a game no one was really watching. Emily fussed with the table settings, her hands shaking just slightly when she thought no one was looking. I noticed. Fathers always notice. We sat down to eat. For the first half hour, I played the part, asked about work, about the house, even about that old truck Nathan kept saying he'd fix. He didn't answer most of it. Just grunted, poured himself another drink. By the time the roast hit the table, the bottle was already half gone. Then it happened. Nathan raised his glass, smirked, and said, "Come on, old man, pour me another. You're not too stiff to keep up, are you?" I chuckled softly. "You've had enough, son." He froze. The word son always set him off, and I knew it. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe it was the years of watching him belittle Emily, hearing the rumors, or seeing her eyes dim a little more each visit. Maybe that night I just had enough. He leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. "You don't tell me what's enough in my house." I didn't flinch. "Then don't ask me to pour it." The silence between us stretched like wire. Emily's fork trembled against her plate. And then, with one quick motion, Nathan hurled his glass across the table. It hit me square in the chest before shattering on the floor. Whiskey splattered across my shirt, stinging like fire. For a second, no one moved. Not even me. Emily gasped, covered her mouth. Nathan just sat back, breathing heavy, his eyes glassy with rage. I saw something in them, something dark, and small, and hollow. A man who thought fear was respect. I stood slowly, wiped the glass off my shirt, and said nothing. Not a curse, not a threat. I just looked at my daughter and said, "You deserve better than this." Then I turned and walked out. The night air hit me like a slap, sharp and cold. As I got into my truck, I saw them through the window, Emily crying, Nathan pacing. The image burned into my mind. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just walking away from dinner. I was walking towards something else entirely. I didn't know it yet, but that night would end more than one kind of silence in our family. That night, I drove home with whiskey drying on my shirt and silence pounding in my ears. I told myself to let it go, that I'd seen worse tempers in my life, that it wasn't my place to meddle in Emily's marriage. But fathers lie to themselves more than anyone else. We lie because the truth feels like failure. I poured myself a small drink, ironic, I know, and sat by the window, watching the rain smear the reflection of the streetlights. Emily used to love the rain when she was a kid. She said it made the world look softer. I wondered if she still thought that now. 2 days later, she called me. Her voice was steady, but her words weren't. "Dad, can you come by?" There was something in her tone that stopped me cold. Not fear, worse. Surrender. I was at her house in 20 minutes. The door was unlocked. Inside, the living room looked like a storm had passed through. A picture frame lay face down, glass cracked. A chair had been tipped over. And there she was, my daughter, sitting on the floor, hugging her knees like she was trying to make herself smaller. She didn't look up right away. He's gone to the bar, she said quietly. Emily, I crouched beside her. What happened? She showed me her arm. A bruise. Not big, but fresh. Purple against pale skin. Said he didn't mean it. Said he was just stressed. I'd heard every version of that sentence before, from my sister years ago, from a neighbor once. It never got easier. He said I embarrassed him in front of you, she whispered. He said I made him look weak. My throat tightened. Did you call the police? She shook her head. It'll only make things worse. And that's when it hit me, the betrayal. Not just his. Hers too, in a way. Because she'd learned to protect him instead of herself. Because somewhere along the line, she stopped believing I could protect her. I helped her clean up, fixed the broken frame, sat her on the couch. You don't have to stay here, I said. She smiled weakly. Where would I go? That smile, that tired, defeated smile, that's what broke me. Not the glass. Not the bruise. The smile that said she'd already accepted this as her life. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like her voice calling for help. I thought about all the times I should have said more, done more. When her mother died, I promised to always protect her. I realized now I'd broken that promise. The next morning, I drove to Nathan's auto shop. I didn't plan anything, just wanted to look him in the eye. He was there, working under a car, pretending like the world was fine. When he saw me, his smirk returned. Come to finish dinner, old man. I stared at him, calm but shaking inside. You ever touch her again, I'll bury you myself. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a cruel one. You don't scare me. She's my wife. She'll always come back. She knows who pays the bills. He leaned close, voice low. You raised her weak, you know that. Always needing someone. I don't remember leaving the shop. All I remember is gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The world outside blurred. My heart felt like a fist pounding against glass. That's when I knew this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about balance, about restoring something that had been broken too long. By the time I reached home, I'd already made my decision. I would teach Nathan that there's a difference between fear and respect. And I'd do it in a way he'd never forget. I thought I knew the shape of our problems. Anger. Alcohol. A man with a chip on his shoulder. But there are betrayals that wear a suit and smile, quieter, slower, and much colder. The kind that eats away at you from the inside until you wake one morning and nothing looks the same. It happened on a Tuesday, late afternoon. I'd gone by Emily's to pick up a file she needed for work and found the kitchen light on and the house heavy with that washed-out quiet that follows a storm. She was at the table, paperwork spread out like flotsam. Her eyes were red, but she was trying that tired diplomacy, the one women put on when they don't want you to worry. She slid a stack of envelopes toward me. Mortgage notices, she said. Bills. Overdrafts. Her voice was flat, practiced. Nathan says he's handling it. I skimmed the papers. Late notices. Calls from collection agencies she'd never mentioned. A vehicle repossession notice buried under a jumble of junk mail. The numbers didn't add up, until she slid an online bank statement across the table and I saw it, transfers, small at first, then larger. Payments to accounts with names I didn't recognize. Withdrawals that matched nights he'd claimed to be at the shop. A payday loan taken out in her name. And at the bottom, a line that made my stomach drop, payment to N. Holloway, $3,200. I remember sitting down hard. The room tilted. Where did he get the money? I asked, steady but cold. She looked at me like I was a stranger she'd once loved. He says he's investing. He says we'll be fine. I trusted him. The word trust hung in the air like a noose. I thought of the bruise on her arm, of the glass across the table, of his smirks. There were different kinds of violence. There was the flash of a fist. And there was the slow theft of a life, siphoning away savings, credit, future security, until a person starts to measure her worth in late notices and resigned sighs. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, and it wasn't anger that came out, it was the ache of a father who'd failed to see the slide. She blinked. I was ashamed. I kept thinking I could fix it. I thought if I worked harder, if I covered the mistakes, he'd stop. He said I owed him for taking care of the house. He said if he left, none of this would be possible. Those words, if he left, none of this would be possible, they were a cage disguised as logic. It wasn't a marriage, it was a ledger. He'd bought control with bills and threats, and then made the bills into a weapon. He used money the way he used fear, to dominate. I spent that night replaying every dinner, every joke, every offhand comment he'd made about paying the bills. How many small cruelties had I dismissed as bravado? How many times had I told myself not to interfere because they were adults? I'd told myself that until the math spelled out the truth. The breaking point didn't arrive with a shout. It arrived quietly, when she pushed a small yellow envelope toward me and said, "He took my father's watch." My father's watch. A cheap, battered thing he loved. He'd given it to me when he retired. The thought of it in some pawnshop window, traded for another night's liquor or another loan payment, that's what broke me. I put the papers in my jacket and stood up. The rain had started again outside, it tapped at the window like a clock counting off the time I had left to act. I felt older in that moment than I ever had, and clearer. Protection isn't always about fists. Sometimes it's about cleaning up a ledger, pulling threads, and finding the rotten seam. I left with a plan forming like frost on glass, precise, slow, and inevitable. If he thought his money and his threats would keep my daughter in place, he'd miscalculated. He'd confused compliance with peace. I would not humiliate him. I would not seek blunt, ugly revenge. I would take back what he'd taken in a way that would restore her life and leave him no room to claim he'd been afraid of me. I would untie the knots he'd tied around her life, one legal paper, one witness, one quiet confrontation at a time. And when the day came, he would look up and realize he'd been undone not by a fight, but by the slow, patient reclamation of what he'd stolen. I learned early that a slow, quiet plan scares a loud one. Loud men like Nathan feed off chaos, the quicker the scream, the quicker they think they've won. So I did what I always did when things mattered, I made a list and started crossing things off. First, I called an old friend, Frank, who ran a small private investigation outfit out of a storefront near the rail yard. Frank and I go back to high school football and bad decisions, he owed me favors and I owed him patience. "You want me poking around Holloway?" he asked after I told him, voice flat and careful. "Yes," I said. "But quiet. Find out where he moves money. Who he owes. Any side accounts, pawn tickets, anything." There was a pause, long enough for the rain to tap the windows. "You got proof, or you just want dirt?" "Proof," I said. "And a way to put it where the bank can see it." Frank started the next morning. He was a good worker, the sort who kept notes like a priest keeps confessions. He checked online transfers, asked a few pointed questions at the shop, and dropped by 2 pawn shops with photos of the watch my father had given me. No luck on the watch, at least not yet, but he found something else, a receipt for electronics bought in cash 2 towns over, on dates that lined up with payday loans taken out in Emily's name. Next, I spoke to a lawyer I trusted, not a flashy one, but a blunt, sensible woman named Marjorie who'd once kept a crooked contractor out of my cousin's pocketbook. She didn't promise miracles. She promised paperwork and teeth. "If he's moving money out of her accounts, we can freeze accounts, get emergency orders, and file for immediate separation of finances," she said. "But we'll need evidence." Bank statements, pawn receipts, witnesses to domestic abuse if you have them. Her voice was efficient, like someone arranging instruments before surgery. Gathering witnesses was harder than I thought. Neighbors who'd seen arguments were reluctant to step forward. People in that town were inclined to close curtains and minds both. But I found one, Mrs. Green from 3 doors down, a widow who kept to her garden and her binoculars. She'd seen Nathan storm out one night, his truck lights flashing, and come back 3 hours later with his jacket smelling like cheap whiskey and smoke. She was willing to sign an affidavit. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. Emily was the most fragile variable. I could push, but too hard and she'd retreat into denial again. I moved slowly. I showed her bank statements, Frank's receipts, Marjorie's clinical plans. Each time I presented a piece of proof, I watched the walls in her face come down another inch. She cried, yes, and sometimes she lashed out, at me for not seeing it earlier, at herself for being trusting. But she stayed. She signed a limited power of attorney that let us look at accounts and speak to the bank. It was the smallest legal step with the biggest consequence. It meant she believed me enough to let me act. The first place we hit was the bank. I asked to speak to the branch manager in the presence of Emily. I didn't threaten. I laid out the evidence, transfers into unknown accounts, withdrawals that didn't match payroll, and a pattern of payday loans taken out and rolled over. The manager's eyes narrowed. We can flag accounts and request holds, but we need a court order to freeze everything, she told me. If you have a lawyer and an affidavit showing coercion or fraud, it helps. So we got that order. Marjorie moved like a lynx, precise, patient, and entirely without theatrics. She filed emergency motions citing financial coercion and emotional abuse, attached the bank statements, Frank's receipts, and Mrs. Green's affidavit. The judge signed a temporary freeze on joint withdrawals and ordered an audit. It felt small, legalistic. It felt, at the same time, like a first brick pulled from the wall Nathan had built around Emily. But I knew papers alone wouldn't change him. Men like Nathan need their illusions stripped publicly, not because I craved spectacle, but because his power depended on appearances. If everyone still thought he was the provider, he could keep the leash tight. So we prepared for the public unraveling too, a report to the credit bureau, documentation for Emily's job so she could get emergency payroll advances, and a list of people Nathan dealt with, suppliers, the small finance places that would be embarrassed to have their names in court. I slept little those nights. The plan lived in my head like a steady engine. There were no fireworks, no dramatic confrontations, just the kind of tedious, stubborn work that wins in the end. I thought about the bruise on Emily's arm, the cracked frame, the watch that still might sit in some pawnshop window. I thought about the man who'd think money and intimidation were the same as respect. When the freeze order came through and the bank called to say they'd placed holds, I felt something like relief. It wasn't the final strike, far from it, but it was a cord cut. For the first time in a long while, Emily could breathe without measuring the cost. We had evidence. We had the law on our side. We had people willing to testify. What we didn't have yet was Nathan's reaction. And for the worst men, the reaction is always where the danger lives. So we prepared for that too. We rehearsed calm answers, moved Emily's jewelry to a safe deposit box, and put her important documents in a folder I kept with me at all times. I bought a small camera to record any outbursts should he try to intimidate us further. It felt intrusive, but necessary. By the time the papers were filed, and the bank had frozen the questionable transfers, Nathan was already pacing like a caged animal. He'd lost control of the accounts he'd been siphoning. He'd lost the quiet financial leash. And somewhere inside him, the illusion that he'd always be the one calling the shots was cracking. I had no desire to break a man. I wanted to unmake what he'd built with lies and fear. The work was ugly at times, legal forms, phone calls, uncomfortable conversations, but every small detail pulled a thread, and those threads, when pulled together, loosened the fabric of his control. When I went to bed that night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt like a man who had finally turned a corner on a long road. The road ahead would be messy. But for the first time since that glass hit my chest, I felt like we were walking it in the right direction. You can only prepare so long before the storm finds you. The freeze order hit on a Thursday morning. By Friday night, Nathan was at my doorstep. I heard the truck before I saw it, engine revving, tires spitting gravel. He didn't even bother knocking. The screen door slammed against the siding, and there he was, standing in the porch light like a man made of bad decisions and whiskey. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he barked. His eyes were bloodshot, hands twitching. "I was wondering when you would," I said quietly. "Come in, or do you plan to shout from the yard?" He stormed inside, shoulders tight, chest puffed. The same bluster I'd seen at that dinner table, just louder now that he felt cornered. "You froze my accounts, you son of a..." "I didn't freeze anything," I cut in, calm as I could. "The court did. You did this yourself." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think you can turn her against me? You? The man who couldn't even keep his own wife alive." That one hit. I felt it behind the ribs like a dull knife. My wife, God rest her, had died of cancer 10 years earlier. He said it because he wanted to wound me. Men like him always reach for cruelty when they lose control. But I'd already decided, no reaction, no fight on his terms. "You've been taking from her for years," I said. "Money, time, dignity. I'm just taking back what was never yours." He stepped closer. "You think you can play savior, old man? She'll come back. They always come back." I could smell the liquor on him. He was close enough that I could see a small nick under his chin where he'd cut himself shaving, a detail too human for the monster I'd built him into in my mind. That's the danger of revenge, you start needing the other person to be pure evil. But the truth is Messier. He was small. Weak. And still dangerous. "She's staying with a friend tonight," I said, flat. "You need to leave. The police have a restraining order filed, and I've got the papers right here if you want to read them." He blinked, not fear, confusion. Then the fury came back. "You think a piece of paper scares me?" "No," I said, locking eyes. "But losing your reputation might." That stopped him. He didn't know yet, but Frank had already sent a dossier to Nathan's suppliers, his boss, and the small-town bank that financed his shop. Everything, the loans, the missing funds, the harassment complaints Emily had finally signed, all of it was documented. There'd be hearings. Audits. The kind of quiet, devastating exposure that doesn't make headlines but ruins credit and trust. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across his face. He tried to laugh it off. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," I said. "But you'll find out Monday morning." He grabbed the nearest thing he could, a photo frame on my mantel, and hurled it against the wall. The glass shattered, scattering light. Then he stood there, panting, waiting for me to rise to it. Waiting for me to give him the fight he came for. But I didn't move. I just looked at the broken glass and said, quietly, "That's all you know how to do, isn't it? Break things." Something in him faltered. His jaw tightened, but his eyes, they looked lost for half a heartbeat. Then he turned and left. Slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood there a long time, listening to the rain start again outside. The photo he'd broken was one of Emily when she was little, sitting on my shoulders at the state fair, both of us laughing. I picked it up carefully, brushed away the shards. The image was fine. Only the glass had cracked. That night, I sat in the kitchen and wrote a letter, not to him, not to Emily, but to myself. It said, "Revenge isn't about destroying a man. It's about freeing what he chained." I slept better after that. The next morning, Frank called. "He's losing it," he said. The bank's investigating. The shop's under audit. Couple of his drinking buddies won't touch him now that word's out. I thanked him. Keep an eye on him, just in case. He paused. You sure you're ready for what comes next? When a man like that starts falling, he'll grab anything he can on the way down. I know, I said. But he's not taking her down with him. There's a certain sound a man makes when his world begins to crumble, not a scream, not a cry, but the hollow silence between phone calls that don't go his way. I heard that silence in Nathan's voice 3 days later, when he finally called me. I was sitting on the porch with my morning coffee when the phone rang. The caller ID showed his number. For a second, I considered letting it ring out, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered. He didn't yell this time. You think you won, he said quietly. The edge was gone, replaced by something like disbelief. They shut down my accounts. The shop's frozen. My guys walked out on me this morning. You did that yourself, I said. He laughed, short, bitter. You think Emily's gonna thank you? She'll hate you for it. You've taken everything. No, I said. I've given her back what was hers. He hung up. 2 hours later, Frank called. He's making calls to lenders, trying to move cash. Looks like he's sleeping at the shop. Word around town is his customers are backing off. He's spooked. Good, I said, but there wasn't much satisfaction in it. Just a long exhale. That afternoon, Emily came by. She looked different. Not fixed, not yet, but lighter somehow. The bruises had faded. Her hair was tied up, her sleeves rolled down, her voice steadier. They called from the bank, she said. They told me they're reviewing my credit. They said I'm not responsible for most of the debt. Marjorie says the judge might approve the separation order by next week. That's good news, I said, smiling carefully. She nodded, then looked at me. He's losing everything, isn't he? Yes, I said. Everything he used to hurt you with. She went quiet for a while. The room filled with the ticking of the clock on the wall. I keep waiting to feel happy, she said finally. But it just feels heavy. That's what justice feels like sometimes, I said. Heavy before it feels light. That night, Frank sent over the final report, every wire transfer, every pawn receipt, every debt he'd shoved in her name. The total was ugly, but clear. We handed it to Marjorie the next morning, and she filed it all. By Friday, Nathan's shop was under official investigation for financial misconduct. The local paper ran a short piece about it, small-town journalism at its finest. Auto repair owner under review for fraud allegations. No names mentioned, but everyone knew. In a town like ours, rumors spread faster than oil on concrete. Within hours, his suppliers pulled their contracts. His landlord padlocked the back gate. It wasn't triumph I felt when I heard. It was pity. Because when men like him fall, they don't just lose money. They lose the story they've told themselves, that they were the ones in charge, that their anger made them strong. But pity doesn't mean forgiveness. That weekend, I drove past the shop. His truck was parked crooked, door half open. The lights inside were off. I pulled over for a moment, watching from across the street. He was sitting on the curb, elbows on his knees, staring at the pavement like it might give him answers. For a second, I almost got out of the truck. Almost. Instead, I rolled down the window and said just loud enough, "You can fix cars, Nathan. You can't fix character." He didn't look up. Just sat there, silent. Back home, Emily was cooking dinner, something simple, pasta and salad. It was the first meal we'd shared without tension in months. She laughed once, real laughter, and I swear it was the best sound I'd heard all year. "Dad," she said after a while, setting her fork down. "Do you ever regret it?" standing up to him. I took a sip of wine, thought about it. No, I said. But I do regret waiting so long. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I do too. Later that night, as I sat by the window, I saw the moon break through the clouds. The same rain-slick streets, the same house, but everything felt changed. Not better yet, just quieter. Frank texted me one last update before I turned off my phone. He's leaving town. Sold the truck. Guess he's done. I didn't answer. Some endings don't need words. Nathan Holloway would fade out like the whiskey he loved, slow, bitter, and forgotten. But Emily, she was learning to live again. To smile again. To look forward, not down. And me? For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to protect her anymore. I could just be her father again. Peace doesn't come all at once. It comes in fragments, the smell of morning coffee without anxiety, the sound of a phone ringing without dread, the small moments when silence feels like rest, not danger. Weeks passed after Nathan left. The town moved on quickly, as towns do. His name became a whisper followed by a shrug. Emily stayed with me for a while, just until I figure things out, she said. But I could see she needed the quiet more than the plan. The house began to sound like it used to when she was little, soft music in the kitchen, doors closing gently instead of slamming, laughter that didn't apologize for existing. She found work again at a design studio downtown. Small hours, modest pay, but honest. I remember driving her to her first day, the way she stared out the window, nervous, but ready. You don't have to wait for everything to feel normal, I told her. You just have to start. At night, we'd sit on the porch, 2 chairs side by side. Sometimes she'd talk, sometimes not. Mostly we watched the fireflies and let the air do the talking. One evening she said quietly, I kept thinking I'd never get my life back. That even if I left him, he'd still own my fear. I looked at her. He only owned what you gave him. And you just took it back. The first letter from the court arrived 2 weeks later, official notice of separation, along with an acknowledgement of financial abuse. Emily read it twice, hands trembling. It's real, she whispered. It's finally real. Then she cried, not the broken, quiet tears I'd seen before, but the kind that rinse pain away. I stepped outside and let her have that moment. There's something sacred about watching someone reclaim themselves. You don't interrupt it. I started walking again in the mornings. Down by the river, through the park, past the diner that still served the same burnt coffee. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I'd thought revenge would feel sharp, a blade, a strike. But what it really felt like was space. Breathing room. I could see my wife's smile in memory without bitterness, hear Emily's laughter without fear. One evening, as I was closing the porch door, I found a small box on the step. No note, no name, just my father's watch inside. Cleaned, polished, ticking steadily. I didn't need to ask who'd brought it back. Nathan must have returned it quietly before leaving town. Maybe guilt. Maybe habit. Maybe a small, final apology. I wound it once and listened to the rhythm. My father used to say time doesn't heal, it humbles. He was right. That night, Emily cooked dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie. The same meal she tried to make the night of the glass. When we sat down, she poured us each a glass of water, not wine, and smiled. Let's start over, she said. And for the first time in months, I laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. To new starts, I said. We clinked our glasses. The sound was soft, clean, and whole. The whiskey stains had long faded from that old shirt. But the lesson remained, sometimes revenge isn't fire and fury. Sometimes it's just peace, earned, steady, and finally, enough. After Emily moved back into her own apartment, the house felt both lighter and lonelier. I'd grown used to hearing another voice in the mornings, the sound of a kettle boiling, her quiet humming when she thought I wasn't listening. Now it was just me and the ticking of my father's watch on the mantel. I'd sit by the window some evenings, the same spot where I'd once stared into rain and anger, and ask myself what I'd really done. I hadn't hit the man, hadn't shouted him down or burned his world with fire, but I'd dismantled him all the same. Line by line, form by form. It was cleaner, yes, but not free of weight. Revenge has a price, even when it's righteous. It demands patience, and it collects pieces of you while you work. I'd see flashes of the old me, the man who used to believe in fairness without bitterness. He'd show up sometimes, just long enough for me to wonder if I'd buried him too deep under plans and paperwork. Still, when I saw Emily smiling in her new photos, laughing with friends, eyes clear, I knew I'd made the right kind of choice. Maybe not the perfect one, but the kind that brings a man back to himself. One night, I took a walk to the river. The water moved slow under the moonlight, silver and endless. I tossed a small stone into the current and whispered, "Let it go." Not to him, not even to Emily, to myself. Because holding on, even to justified anger, keeps you standing on the same bank while the rest of life moves on. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, the air cool. I made coffee, stood on the porch, and watched the first light hit the horizon. The world didn't owe me peace, but for the first time, it felt like it was offering it anyway. And I accepted. Forgiveness is not a door that opens all at once, it's a lock you learn to unfasten with trembling hands. I didn't set out to forgive Nathan. For months, I thought of him as a shadow, a mistake carved into our lives, a man I'd erased to keep my daughter safe. But time, that quiet sculptor, kept sanding the edges of my anger until all that was left was exhaustion. It began with a letter. I found it in my mailbox one gray morning, postmarked from a town 3 hours west. No return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting that I recognized instantly. I almost threw it away, but something stopped me. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the need for closure. Inside, the words were messy, uneven. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need you to know I'm sober now. I took a job fixing boats down by the coast. I don't drink. I don't fight. I think about Emily every day, and I know I can't undo what I did. But I wanted to tell you, you were right. Fear isn't respect. I learned that the hard way. There was no signature, but it didn't need one." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it on the table. For a long time, I just stared at it. Part of me wanted to burn it, to reject the idea that a few lines of remorse could wipe away years of pain. But another part, smaller and older, whispered that maybe this was the last piece of the story I needed. That evening, I told Emily. She listened quietly, fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. Sometimes silence is the only answer that doesn't make things worse. She nodded. "I think that's fair." Later, when she left, I unfolded the letter again. I could still see the ghost of the man I'd faced on that porch, angry, cornered, small. But this version of him, the one who wrote those words, felt different. Deflated maybe, but human. I went out to the backyard where the grass met the fence line. The sky was dark, but clear. I held the letter over the fire pit and let the flames take it slowly, until all that remained were drifting curls of ash. The smoke rose into the night like something being carried away, not absolution, but release. Standing there, I thought about the word revenge. It used to taste sharp, like iron on my tongue. Now it tasted like quiet rain. What I'd done wasn't vengeance. It was a reckoning, an ending that gave space for something gentler to begin. When I went back inside, I placed my father's watch on the table beside my coffee cup. Its ticking filled the silence like a heartbeat, steady, unbroken. For the first time, I realized I wasn't keeping it for memory's sake anymore. I was keeping it to remind myself that time doesn't heal for you, it just waits for you to be ready. The next morning, Emily called. She was on her way to an art exhibit in the city, laughing about getting lost in traffic. I listened, smiled, and realized I wasn't afraid of her laughter anymore. It didn't sound fragile, it sounded free. And that, I suppose, is what forgiveness really is. Not forgetting. Not excusing. Just letting the future speak louder than the past. When I hung up, I whispered a quiet goodbye to the ghost of that night, the glass, the bruise, the fear. Then I went to the porch, poured a cup of coffee, and watched the sun climb the sky. Peace didn't arrive with a thunderclap. It came quietly, one heartbeat, one tick, one breath at a time. A year passed before I realized I'd stopped checking the mail with dread. Bills still came, the world still turned, but the air in my house no longer carried that invisible weight. Emily was thriving, working, painting, laughing in a way that sounded like sunlight. I'd become the quiet observer again, not the protector. And that was how it should be. One spring afternoon, she stopped by with a small wrapped box. "For you," she said, smiling. Inside was a framed photo, the two of us sitting on the porch the night we'd started over, fireflies blinking around us like stars fallen low. Under it, she'd written in her neat script, "We made it." I didn't say much, just nodded. Sometimes words ruin what's already perfect. After she left, I sat outside, the frame resting on my lap. The garden hummed with bees, the fence line glowing with new green. I thought about the long road we'd walked, the anger, the silence, the quiet victories that never made a sound. Revenge had started it, but love had finished it. As dusk settled, I wound my father's watch for the last time and set it beside the photograph. Its steady ticking blended with the evening breeze, the rhythm of things continuing, as they should. I raised my glass of tea, not whiskey, and whispered, "Here's to endings that make room for beginnings." In the distance, thunder rumbled, soft, harmless, just a reminder that storms always pass. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the night wrap around me. The story was over. The pain had done its work. And in the quiet heartbeat of the world, I heard it clear as ever, not revenge, not grief, but peace. The kind you earn one choice at a time. If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can continue the journey by clicking the box on the left. Thank you for being here.